We are not what we know, but what we are willing to learn. There's something peculiar about the way we experience time. Not the mechanical ticking of clocks or the turning of calendar pages, but the lived experience of being a human moving through existence. Right now, as you process these words, you are simultaneously the person you were yesterday and the person you're becoming tomorrow. You carry within you every version of yourself that has ever existed, layered like sediment and stone, each stratum telling a story about who you thought you were at that moment. But here's where it gets interesting. That story changes, not just as new chapters are added, but retroactively. The past you remember today is not quite the same past you remembered a year ago, and it won't be the same past you remember a decade from now. We are constantly rewriting our histories, reinterpreting our experiences, and reshaping the meaning of events that we once thought were set in stone. The then keeps changing based on the now. This isn't a flaw in human psychology. It's not some bug in our cognitive software that needs to be patched. It's the feature that makes transformation possible. It's what allows a caterpillar to become a butterfly without losing the thread of its own existence. And understanding this peculiar relationship between who we were and who we are might just be the key to understanding who we can become. Let's start with a seemingly simple question. Are you the same person you were 10 years ago? Your immediate instinct might be to say, yes, of course you are. You have the same name, the same basic identity, the same fundamental sense of being you. But then again, almost every cell in your body has been replaced since then. The thoughts that occupied your mind a decade ago have long since dissolved like morning mist. The concerns that kept you awake at night probably seem almost quaint now, or perhaps entirely incomprehensible. The person you loved, the dreams you chased, the fears that gripped you, all of it has either transformed or vanished entirely. So which is it? Are you the same person? Or are you someone entirely new wearing the old person's name tag? The ancient Greeks had a thought experiment about this, though they framed it in terms of a ship rather than a person. It's called the Ship of Theseus. Imagine a ship that sails the seas for decades. Over time, planks rot and are replaced. The sail tears and is mended, eventually replaced entirely. The mast splinters and is swapped out. Piece by piece, component by component, every single part of the original ship is eventually replaced. The question is it still the same ship? And if not, at what point did it stop being the original ship? Was it when the first plank was replaced? The halfway point? The final piece? And here's where it gets deliciously complicated. What if someone collected all those discarded original pieces and reconstructed them into a ship? Which one would be the real Ship of Theseus, the one that maintained continuous existence through gradual replacement, or the one made of all the original materials? This isn't just philosophical wordplay. This is the story of your life. You are simultaneously the Ship of Theseus in active service, constantly replacing your parts while maintaining your identity, and you are also, in a sense, the collection of discarded pieces, all those previous versions of yourself that no longer exist but somehow still inform who you are. The philosopher Heraclitus understood this. He's the one who supposedly said, you can't step in the same river twice. The river keeps flowing, constantly changing, never the same collection of water molecules from moment to moment. But there's a deeper insight here that often gets overlooked. You're not the same person stepping into the river twice either. Both the river and the person are in constant flux. The then and the now are locked in an eternal dance, each one giving meaning to the other. But we resist this truth. We cling to continuity. We tell ourselves stories about who we are that create the illusion of a stable, unchanging self moving through time. And these stories are powerful. They're necessary. Without them, we'd dissolve into chaos, unable to maintain relationships, commitments, or any sense of meaning. The narrative self, the story we tell ourselves about ourselves, is what allows us to function as social beings, to make promises, to have responsibilities, and to be held accountable. Yet this same narrative self can become a prison. Because once we've decided who we are, once we've crystallized our identity into a fixed form, we become terrified of anything that might challenge or change it. We start policing ourselves, suppressing thoughts and desires that don't fit the character we've cast ourselves as. We reject opportunities for growth because they would require us to become someone we're not. And we forget, or perhaps we never fully realized, that the person we are right now was once someone we weren't, someone we had to become. Think about the last time someone said to you, "That's not like you," or "You've changed." What they really meant was that you deviated from the story they'd constructed about who you are. But here's the beautiful, terrifying truth. You're not obligated to remain consistent with anyone's narrative about you, including your own. The then does not have a binding contract with the now. You are not the defendant in a court case where past versions of yourself can be called as witnesses against you. This brings us to shame, that insidious emotion that whispers, "Who you are is not who you should be." Shame is the enforcement mechanism of the narrative self. It's what keeps us locked into outdated versions of ourselves, performing roles we've outgrown, and living up to expectations that may never have truly been ours to begin with. Shame says, "Remember who you were supposed to be? Remember what you promised? Remember the path you said you'd take? Why are you deviating? Why are you changing? Why aren't you staying true to yourself?" But what if staying true to yourself actually requires changing? What if the real betrayal is remaining static, refusing to evolve, clinging to a version of yourself that no longer serves you or perhaps never did? What if the most authentic thing you can do is acknowledge that the person you were is not the person you are, and that's not a failure, it's life itself? Consider the person who spends their 20s pursuing a career because it's what they thought they should want, what their parents wanted, or what society deems successful. They build their entire identity around this path. They make sacrifices, develop skills, and establish a reputation. And then, in their 30s or 40s, they realize, with creeping horror, that they've been living someone else's dream. The work that once felt purposeful now feels hollow. The achievements that once brought pride now bring only emptiness. But by this point, they're trapped, not by external circumstances necessarily, but by their own narrative. "This is who I am," they tell themselves. "This is what I do. This is my identity. I can't just throw it all away." But can't they? Or more precisely, must they carry the then into the now like a ball and chain? Must the choices made by a previous version of themselves, someone who had less experience, less wisdom, less self-knowledge, determine the trajectory of every version that comes after? The answer is no. The answer has always been no. But it's an answer that requires courage, because changing the story means accepting that the person you thought you were might have been, at least in part, a fiction. And we're deeply invested in our fictions. They give us coherence in a chaotic world. They make us comprehensible to others. They allow us to maintain relationships across time. This is why transformation is often accompanied by loss. When you change, you lose the relationships that were built on the old version of you. You lose the comfort of familiar patterns. You lose the identity you'd constructed so carefully. You experience a kind of death, not a physical death, but a psychological one. The person you were has to die so the person you're becoming can live. And like all deaths, it involves grief, fear, resistance, and ultimately, if you're lucky, acceptance and renewal. The psychologist Carl Jung understood this deeply. He called it the process of individuation, becoming who you truly are, by integrating all the disparate parts of yourself, including the parts you've rejected or hidden away. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about becoming more fully yourself. But here's the paradox. To become more fully yourself, you have to let go of the person you thought you were. The then must die for the now to be born. Think about the hero's journey, that archetypal story pattern that Joseph Campbell identified, running through myths across all cultures and throughout history. A hero starts in their ordinary world, comfortable and familiar. Then comes a call to adventure, something that disrupts that comfort and demands a response. At first, the hero refuses. They're not ready. They don't have what it takes. They prefer the known to the unknown. But eventually, through circumstance or choice, they cross the threshold into a special world where old rules don't apply. In this special world, they face trials. They confront enemies, gather allies, descend into caves, and fight dragons, both literal and metaphorical. And at the climax of the journey, they experience a supreme ordeal, a brush with death, a moment where everything hangs in the balance. If they survive, they're transformed. They return to the ordinary world, but they're no longer the person who left. They bring back wisdom, gifts, and new capabilities. They've died and been reborn. This isn't just a story structure for myths and movies. It's the pattern of significant life change. Every time you face a major life transition, a career change, a relationship ending, a loss, a diagnosis, a move, a crisis of faith, you're being called to a hero's journey. The person you were is no longer adequate to the situation you're facing. You're being called to become someone new, and like the heroes of old, you'll probably refuse at first. You'll cling to the familiar, even as it crumbles around you. You'll try to solve new problems with old solutions. You'll resist, deny, bargain, and rage. But eventually, if you're to move forward, you'll have to cross that threshold. You'll have to leave the old world behind and venture into the unknown. You'll have to face your dragons, your fears, your limitations, your shame, and your carefully constructed illusions about who you are and what you're capable of. And in that confrontation, you'll experience a kind of death. The death of the old self. The death of outdated beliefs. The death of strategies that no longer work. And if you're brave enough to die, you get to be reborn. Not as someone completely different, but as a more integrated, more authentic version of yourself. Someone who has faced the darkness and returned with light. Someone who has looked into the abyss and discovered they contain depths they never suspected. Someone who has let go of who they were supposed to be and embraced who they actually are. But here's what makes this process so difficult. We live in a culture that's deeply ambivalent about change. On one hand, we celebrate transformation stories. We love the narrative of the person who reinvents themselves, who overcomes adversity, who becomes something greater than they were. We consume these stories voraciously in books, movies, and social media posts. We're inspired by them, moved by them, and energized by them. Yet in our actual lives, we resist change with every fiber of our being. We value consistency, reliability, and predictability. We want people to stay the same, so we know how to relate to them. We judge people who change direction as flaky, unstable, and uncommitted. We celebrate the entrepreneur who never gave up on their dream and condemn the one who quit and started something else. We admire people who know who they are and are suspicious of people who seem to be constantly reinventing themselves. This cultural ambivalence reflects a deeper confusion about identity and authenticity. We've somehow gotten it into our heads that authenticity means being consistent, that being true to yourself means never changing, and that integrity requires maintaining the same positions, beliefs, and identities throughout your life. But this is nonsense. It's a static conception of selfhood that doesn't match the lived reality of being human. Real authenticity isn't about consistency. It's about honesty. It's about being truthful about where you are right now, even if that's different from where you were yesterday. It's about acknowledging your evolution rather than denying it. It's about having the courage to say, I used to believe X, but I don't anymore. Or, I used to want Y, but now I want Z. Or, I used to be this kind of person, but I'm becoming a different kind of person. This kind of authenticity is terrifying because it makes you vulnerable. It means you might be wrong. It means you don't have all the answers. It means you're still figuring things out. It means you're human. And in a culture that values certainty, expertise, and unwavering conviction, admitting you're still becoming is almost transgressive. But consider the alternative. Consider a life lived in service to an outdated version of yourself. Consider the slow suffocation of denying your own evolution. Consider the relationships that ossify into performances, where you're no longer present but merely playing the role of who you once were. Consider the career you hate but can't leave because this is what I do. Consider the beliefs you no longer hold but can't admit to having changed because This is what I believe. Consider the belief subscribed to the dreams you've outgrown, but keep pretending to chase because this is who I am. This is the death that comes from refusing to die. It's the living death of stagnation, of self-betrayal, of slowly becoming a museum exhibit of your former self. And ironically, in trying to maintain consistency, in clinging to the then, you lose touch with the now. You become increasingly inauthentic, increasingly alienated from your own experience, and increasingly out of sync with reality. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche understood this. He wrote about the necessity of self-overcoming, of constantly dying to your current self so you can become something greater. He wasn't advocating for chaos or instability. He was recognizing that life itself is a process of transformation, and to be alive is to be constantly becoming. He called it becoming who you are, a phrase that perfectly captures the paradox. You're not inventing yourself from nothing, but you're also not remaining static. You're uncovering, developing, and becoming the fullest expression of your potential, which necessarily means leaving behind lesser expressions. This process requires what Nietzsche called Amor fati, love of fate, not just acceptance of what happens to you, but love for it. Love for the whole journey, including the parts where you were wrong, where you suffered, where you failed, and where you were someone you're now embarrassed to remember being. Because all of it, all of the then, brought you to this now. And this now, however imperfect, is the only place from which you can build a future. This doesn't mean you shouldn't have regrets. Regret is a sign that you've evolved, that your values have shifted, and that you've grown beyond who you were. The person you were made choices that the person you are wouldn't make. That's not a contradiction, it's growth. The question is what you do with that recognition. Do you let it paralyze you with shame, or do you let it inform your choices going forward? Here's a strange truth. Your past self is both you and not you. They're you in the sense of continuity. There's an unbroken thread of experience connecting that person to this one. But they're not you in the sense of identity. They had different knowledge, different capabilities, different perspectives, and sometimes even different values. They did the best they could with what they had at the time, and now you're doing the best you can with what you have at this time. And someday, a future version of you will look back on current you with the same mixture of recognition and bewilderment. This is the eternal relationship between the then and the now. We're always looking back at previous versions of ourselves, trying to understand them, trying to make sense of their choices, trying to extract lessons from their experiences. And those previous versions are always, in a sense, trying to communicate with us across time, though we often mishear their messages. That letter you wrote to your future self when you were younger, do you remember it? The dreams you had, the person you thought you'd become, the things you thought would matter? How accurate were those predictions? Probably not very. And yet, was that younger version of you wrong to have those dreams, those expectations, that vision of the future? No. They were working with the information available to them. They were trying to author their life, to set an intention, to create meaning. The fact that things didn't turn out exactly as planned doesn't invalidate the attempt. And in the same way, the intentions you set today, the plans you make, and the vision you have for your future self, these too will probably be revised, adjusted, or completely reimagined as you move forward. And that's okay. You're not failing at life by changing course. You're navigating. You're responding to new information. You're adapting. You're alive. But there's something even more subtle happening in the relationship between the then and the now. It's not just that you're changing, though you are. It's that the meaning of your past is changing too. An event that seemed devastating at the time might now be seen as necessary, even beneficial. A relationship that felt perfect might now be recognized as limiting. A success you once celebrated might now seem hollow. A failure you once mourned might now be appreciated as a redirection. This isn't revisionist history. This isn't denying what happened or how it felt at the time. It's recognizing that the meaning of events isn't fixed at the moment they occur. Meaning is something we construct retrospectively, in dialogue with our present selves and our current understanding. The then is constantly being reinterpreted by the now, And in that reinterpretation, it changes, not factually, but meaningfully. This is why two people can go through the same event and have completely different stories about it years later. It's why your siblings remember your childhood differently than you do. It's why your memory of a relationship differs from your ex-partner's memory. It's not necessarily that anyone is lying or misremembering, though that happens too. It's that we're all constantly reconstructing our pasts in light of our present, finding different meanings, emphasizing different details, and creating different narratives. And this raises an important question. If the past is constantly being reconstructed, is there such a thing as an objective personal history? Or is your past always, to some degree, a fiction, a story you tell yourself to make sense of how you got here? The answer is probably both. There are objective facts about your past, things that happened, words that were said, actions that were taken. But the meaning of those facts, the way they're assembled into a narrative, the lessons they teach, the person they reveal you to be, all of that is constructed. And it's constructed by your current self, with your current values, through the lens of your current understanding. This is simultaneously liberating and unsettling. It's liberating because it means you're not trapped by your past. You can reinterpret it. You can find new meanings in old events. You can construct narratives that serve you rather than imprison you. You're not the victim of your history. You're its author and editor, constantly revising, constantly reshaping. But it's unsettling because it undermines the idea of a stable, knowable self. If your past keeps changing, if its meaning is always provisional, always subject to reinterpretation, then who are you really? Are you the person you remember being, the person you actually were, or the person you're becoming? Are you defined by your actions, your intentions, or your interpretations? Are you the narrator of your story, the protagonist, or something else entirely? Maybe you're all of it. Maybe you're the sum total of every version of yourself that has ever existed, integrated into this present moment. Maybe you're the conversation between all those versions, the negotiation, the synthesis. Maybe you're not a thing at all, but a process, not a noun, but a verb, not being, but becoming. This idea terrifies us because we want solidity. We want to know who we are. We want to be able to point to ourselves and say, this is me. This is what I stand for. This is my identity. We want that sense of groundedness, of knowing, of certainty. And there's nothing wrong with that desire. Humans need some sense of continuity and coherence to function. We can't be pure flux and flow. But perhaps the middle path is to hold your identity lightly, to have a sense of who you are while remaining open to who you're becoming, to honor the then while staying present to the now, to construct narratives about yourself that give your life meaning and direction, while recognizing that those narratives are provisional, subject to revision, and useful fictions rather than absolute truths. This requires a particular kind of courage, the courage to live with uncertainty about yourself. The courage to say, I think I'm this kind of person, but I might be wrong. Or, I believe this right now, but I'm open to changing my mind. Or, this is my story today, but it might be a different story tomorrow. It requires intellectual humility combined with emotional honesty. It requires being both committed and flexible, both grounded and open. And it requires grieving, because every time you change, every time you let go of an old version of yourself, you're experiencing a loss. The person you were is gone. They no longer exist. And even if they were limiting you, even if letting them go is ultimately freeing, there's still grief in that letting go. Grief for the time spent being someone you no longer are. Grief for the relationships built on that old version. Grief for the certainty that comes with thinking you know who you are. But after the grief comes something else, a kind of lightness. The lightness that comes from letting go of an ill-fitting identity. The relief that comes from finally admitting you've changed. The freedom that comes from no longer having to maintain a performance of consistency. The energy that's released when you stop resisting your own evolution. And with that lightness comes possibility. Because if you're not trapped by who you were, then who might you become? If the then doesn't determine the now, what does? If your past doesn't bind you, what future might you create? If your identity is not fixed but fluid, what new forms might you take? These aren't abstract philosophical questions. They're deeply practical ones that everyone faces, whether they articulate them this way or not. Every time you're at a crossroads, every time you feel that nagging sense that something needs to change, every time you catch yourself thinking, is this all there is? You're bumping up against these questions. You're feeling the tension between the then and the now. You're sensing that the person you've been is not quite the person you are or the person you're being called to become. And in those moments, you have a choice. You can resist. You can double down on the old identity, the old story, the old version of yourself. You can surround yourself with people who knew you when, who remember who you used to be, who will help you maintain the fiction of consistency. You can keep performing the role you've been playing, even as it becomes increasingly exhausting and inauthentic. Or you can surrender, not surrender in the sense of giving up, but surrender in the sense of letting go. You can allow the death of the old self. You can release your grip on who you thought you were supposed to be. You can step into the uncertainty of becoming. You can trust that just as you survived every previous transformation from infant to child to adolescent to adult, through every heartbreak and failure and loss and reinvention, you'll survive this one too. You'll emerge different, but you'll emerge. This is what spiritual traditions have understood for millennia, though they've expressed it in different metaphors. The Buddhist idea of no self, the recognition that there is no fixed, permanent identity. The Christian idea of being born again, of dying to your old self and rising as someone new. The indigenous vision quest, where you go into the wilderness as one person and return as another. The alchemical process of transformation, where base metal becomes gold through a process of dissolution and reconstitution. All of these are pointing to the same truth. You are not a fixed entity, but a dynamic process. You are not a statue, but a river. You are not a photograph, but a video. You are not being, but becoming. The then and the now are not in opposition, they're in conversation. Each one gives context and meaning to the other. Without the then, the now would have no history, no depth, no story. Without the now, the then would have no meaning, no interpretation, and no future. And here's where it gets really interesting. This relationship between past and present doesn't just apply to yourself. It applies to all of history, all tradition, and all inherited wisdom. We're always in dialogue with the past, reinterpreting it, finding new meanings in old stories, and discovering contemporary relevance in ancient wisdom. The past is not dead, it's not even past, as Faulkner wrote. It's alive in the present, being constantly reconstituted and reimagined. This means that when you read Nietzsche or Heraclitus or any thinker from another era, you're not just receiving their ideas as they were originally intended. You're encountering them through your contemporary lens, finding meanings in them that might not have been there originally but are there now because of who you are and when you are. The text doesn't change, but its meaning does, because meaning requires a reader, and every reader brings their own now to the encounter with the then. And this is why wisdom traditions endure. Not because they contain absolute, timeless truths that remain unchanged across millennia, but because they're rich enough, deep enough, and open enough to be continually reinterpreted. Each generation finds something different in them, something relevant to their particular challenges and questions. The then speaks to each, now in a different voice, addressing different concerns, offering different insights. The same is true of your own past. The experiences you had, the lessons you learned, and the wisdom you accumulated, these don't have a single, fixed meaning. They mean something different to you now than they did when they occurred. They'll mean something different again in 10 years. You're always in dialogue with your own history, always reinterpreting, always finding new significance in old events. This is why journaling can be such a powerful practice. When you write about your experiences as they're happening, you're creating a record of the then from the perspective of that moment's now. And when you read those entries years later, you encounter your past self directly, unmediated by memory's reconstructions. You see what you were actually thinking and feeling at the time, which is often quite different from how you remember thinking and feeling. And in that encounter, there's an opportunity for integration, for understanding, for compassion. You might cringe at your younger self's naivety, or certainty, or blindness, but you might also be moved by their earnestness, their hope, and their courage. You might recognize qualities they had that you've lost. You might appreciate struggles they faced that you'd forgotten about. You might see them more clearly and more kindly than you saw yourself at the time. This is the gift of time and change. You get to become your own mentor, your own wise elder, and your own compassionate witness. The now can offer the then, understanding and forgiveness and appreciation. And then they can offer the now perspective and context and humility. Look, the man then says, you've changed before. You've survived worse than this. You've been wrong before and lived to laugh about it. You've been transformed before and integrated it. You can do it again. And perhaps this is the ultimate wisdom about the relationship between the then and the now. Neither one is more real or more important than the other. They're both true, both valid, and both part of the larger story of becoming human. The then gives you roots, history, experience, lessons learned, relationships formed, and challenges overcome. The now gives you leaves, growth, potential, possibility, presence, life as it's actually being lived. And together, they make you whole, a being with both depth and height, both history and future, and both stability and change. You don't have to choose between honoring who you were and embracing who you're becoming. You don't have to choose between consistency and growth, between loyalty to the past and openness to the future, or between the comfort of the known and the excitement of the unknown. You can hold both. You can be both. You are both. You are the sum of every moment you've lived and every choice you've made and every person you've been, but you're also more than that sum. You're the integration, the synthesis, the conversation between all those versions. You're the narrator making sense of it all, the protagonist living through it, and the reader discovering what it means. You're the then, the now, and the not yet. You're becoming who you really are, which means you're always arriving and always departing, always the same and always different, always continuous and always transforming. And maybe that's not something to be solved or resolved or figured out. Maybe it's something to be lived, experienced, and embraced. Maybe the goal isn't to finally nail down your identity once and for all, but to get comfortable with the fluidity of it. Maybe the point isn't to become consistent, but to become authentic. Maybe the work isn't to stop changing, but to change consciously, intentionally, and courageously. Maybe the highest form of self-knowledge isn't knowing who you are in some fixed, permanent sense, but knowing that you're always becoming, always evolving, always in dialogue with your own history and your own potential. Maybe wisdom isn't certainty, but flexibility. Maybe integrity isn't consistency, but honesty. Maybe being true to yourself doesn't mean staying the same, it means having the courage to change. So here's the invitation, the challenge, and the permission. Let yourself change. Let the person you were inform the person you are, without determining it. Let your past teach you, without imprisoning you. Let your story evolve. Let your identity shift. Let yourself die 1,000 small deaths, so you can be born 1,000 times into more authentic, more integrated, more whole versions of yourself. Honor the then. It brought you here. It taught you lessons. It gave you strengths. It shaped you in ways both visible and invisible. But don't be bound by it. Don't let it define you. Don't let who you were prevent who you're becoming. Embrace the now, this moment, this version of yourself, this particular configuration of thoughts and feelings and capabilities and limitations. This is real. This is what you have to work with. This is where life is actually happening, not in memories of the past or fantasies of the future, but here, now, in this present moment, with all its messy, complicated, beautiful reality. And stay open to the not yet, to the version of yourself that hasn't emerged yet but is already trying to the possibilities you can't quite see yet but can sense hovering at the edge of awareness, to the future that's calling you forward into uncertainty and transformation and new forms of being. The then and the now, they're not in conflict. They're partners in the grand adventure of becoming human, of becoming yourself, of becoming real. And somewhere between who you were and who you are, Between memory and presence, and between history and possibility, you exist. Not as a fixed point, but as a process. Not as a destination, but as a journey. Not as a thing, but as a happening. You are always arriving at yourself. You are always becoming who you really are. And that becoming is not a problem to be solved. It's a mystery to be lived, a dance to be danced, a story that writes itself as you read it, constantly surprising you with plot twists and character developments you never saw coming. So let it happen. Let yourself change. Let the story unfold. Let the then become the now, become the then again in an endless cycle of transformation. Let yourself be human in all its contradictory, beautiful, confusing glory. Because in the end, that's all any of us can do. Be here now, honor where we've been, stay open to where we're going, and trust that somehow, in ways we can't quite understand, it all makes sense. Not the kind of sense that can be explained or defended, but the kind of sense that can only be lived, felt, experienced. The then and the now, past and present, who you were and who you are. They're not separate. They're two sides of the same coin, two notes in the same melody, two brushstrokes in the same painting. And together, they create something neither could create alone. A life, your life, this strange and beautiful adventure of being and becoming, of arriving and departing, of dying and being born again and again and again. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps that's everything. Perhaps that's the whole point.